Breathless, March 1944. 7 American pilots are already dead because at 400 miles per hour their brand new Mustangs turned into flying coffins. The generals blamed the pilots. The manuals said it was impossible to fix. Then one enlisted mechanic, armed with nothing but a piece of scrap wire everyone laughed at, broke every rule in the book, and in 14 days turned the entire air war upside down. Hit that like button right now if you believe one ordinary man can change history, and subscribe with notifications on, because in the next 20 minutes you're about to watch the most insane, forgotten story of World War II that the history books tried to bury. Let's dive in. Early 1944. To anyone standing on an English airfield, the North American P-51B Mustang 147 looked like the answer to every prayer the 8th Air Force had whispered since 1942. Long, clean lines, a laminar flow wing that sliced the air like a scalpel, and beneath the cowling, the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, supercharged, liquid-cooled, giving the Mustang the legs to fly from Essex all the way to Berlin and still have fuel to fight. When it got there, for the first time, American heavy bombers would not be alone over the Reich. Pilots called her the Cadillac of the sky. Ground crews polished the bare aluminum until it flashed like a mirror under the weak winter sun. On paper, the P-51B was perfection. Reality arrived at 400 miles an hour. Above that speed, in a hard turn or a roll, the ailerons simply froze. The control column turned to stone in the pilot's hands. The Mustang became a 10,000-pound missile with no way to change direction. German pilots in Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s learned the symptom fast. Force the American into a high-speed dive, wait for the inevitable stiffening of the wings, then pull up behind him and finish the job. The Luftwaffe even had a name for it, the Mustang Snap. The 354th Fighter Group, the first to receive the P-51B in combat, paid the highest price. Between November 1943 and early March 1944, 7 of its pilots died in under 3 months because of compressibility-induced aileron lock. 7 names added to the board at Debden: Lieutenants James Howard Woolfolk, Robert Clark, Charles Scum, and for more. Each loss followed the same pattern: radio call of bandits, sudden silence, wreckage scattered across French farmland. The official 8th Air Force doctrine was blunt: never slow down, never turn below 400 miles per hour, fight vertically, keep your energy. The manuals insisted that was the correct way to fly the Mustang. Pilots who died had simply broken the rules. In the widow's letters that reached Debden that spring, the phrase appeared again and again: they told me he was a good pilot. Then why is he dead? North American Aviation's test pilots in California claimed they had never seen the problem. The brass at 8 Fighter Command circulated memos blaming pilot error. The RAF, which had flown earlier Allison-engined Mustangs, quietly warned that high Mach stiffness was a known issue in any thin-wing design, but their reports were filed away. Meanwhile, every week another Mustang left the runway at Debden and never came back. The scoreboard in the operations hut told the story, without mercy. For every German aircraft the 354th shot down in early 1944, they were losing more than one of their own. The plane everyone loved had become a death trap wearing a beautiful skin, and no one in authority seemed willing to admit that the flaw might not be in the men flying it, but in the machine itself. Technical Sergeant James Rodriguez, known as Robby to the few men who bothered to learn his name, worked nights in Hangar 3 at RAF Debden. 29 years old, born in Laredo, Texas, son of a railroad mechanic. He had enlisted in 1940 and risen no higher than E6 because the Army Air Forces still preferred its technical experts to be white and, if possible, officers. Rodriguez had been line chief on the 353rd Fighter Squadron's P-51Bs since the group arrived in England in November 1943. Every wrecked Mustang that came back on a trailer passed through his hands. He saw the same crushed fuselages, the same frozen aileron bell cranks, the same cables stretched drum-tight. The pilots blamed compressibility. The engineers blamed the pilots. Rodriguez began to suspect something simpler. He started staying after hours, long after the English fog rolled in and the floodlights dimmed. With a flashlight between his teeth, he traced the aileron control circuit from the cockpit to the wingtip. He measured cable tension with a borrowed fish scale, 42 pounds at rest, far above the factory specification of 28 to 32 pounds. North American Aviation had tightened the cables on the assembly line to eliminate slop and to make the airplane feel crisp during slow-speed taxi. Tests at 450 knots indicated that extra tension turned the cables into steel rods. The bell cranks jammed against their stops. The ailerons locked. In January 1944, after the fourth fatal crash, Rodriguez took his findings to the group engineering officer, Major James Howard the same Howard, who would later win the Medal of Honor over Berlin. Rodriguez laid out the tension measurements, the bell crank wear patterns, the correlation with speed. The major listened politely, then told him the problem was classified as compressibility, that North American was already studying it in wind tunnels, and that enlisted personnel were not to second-guess factory settings. Translation: stay in your lane, Sergeant. Rodriguez went back to the hangar. He kept measuring. He kept watching pilots die. By late February, he had tested his theory on the ground. Using a spare wing section, he loosened the cables to 30 pounds and added a simple safety wire loop as a temporary stop to prevent over-travel in the opposite direction. The bell crank moved freely even when he yanked the control column with both hands. He repeated the test 20 times. The fix worked every time. He wrote a formal report and submitted it through channels. 2 weeks later it came back marked disapproved, insufficient data. No one interviewed him. No one asked to see the test rig. On the 5th of March 1944, Lieutenant Charles Gumb failed to return from a ramrod to Bordeaux. His wingman reported the Mustang entering a dive at over 500 miles per hour, then simply continuing straight into the ground. No pullout, no radio call. That night Rodriguez sat alone in the empty crew room, staring at the latest name taped to the missing board. He made his decision. If the chain of command would not fix the airplanes, he would do it himself, one aircraft at a time, without permission, without paperwork, and without telling the pilots until they were already airborne and alive. The next morning he walked into the hangar carrying nothing but a pair of pliers and a coil of 0.032-inch stainless steel safety wire. The rebellion of the 12-inch fix had begun. The 6th of March 1944, dawn at RAF Station Debden, Essex. A cold, dripping fog clung to the perimeter track. Technical Sergeant James Rodriguez waited beside Lieutenant Carl Mitchell's P-51B, serial for 36639, nicknamed Lonesome Polecat. Mitchell, 24 years old, from Oklahoma City, was scheduled to lead Red Flight on a bomber escort to Berlin. Rodriguez had serviced 639 the night before. The airplane was already signed off as ready. At 5:45, while the pilots were still in the briefing hut, Rodriguez opened the port wing root access panel just aft of the main spar. Working by flashlight, he loosened the aileron cable turnbuckles exactly 1 full turn each, dropping tension from 42 pounds to 29. Then, using side-cutting pliers, he twisted a 12-inch length of 0.032-inch stainless safety wire into a simple figure-8 loop around the bell crank horn. The loop acted as a cushion stop. It allowed full travel in the low-speed direction, but prevented the cable from pulling the bell crank past the jamming point at high speed. Total time, 4 minutes. He closed the panel, wiped the frost from his hands, and said nothing. At 7:12, the 4 Mustangs of Red Flight taxied out. No one on the line noticed anything different. Rodriguez stood with the ground crews near the control tower, hands in the pockets of his coveralls, watching the takeoff run. Over the channel the group climbed to 26,000 feet. At 10:38 Berlin time, Mitchell's flight was jumped by 8 Focke-Wulf 190s from JG-11 diving out of the sun. Standard Luftwaffe tactic: force the Mustangs down, accelerate past 400 miles per hour, wait for the ailerons to lock, then reverse and kill. On the Debden radio net the exchange was brief and frantic. Red leader, brake right. He's closing fast. Red leader, brake right. He's closing fast. Mitchell rolled hard into the attacker, stick full over. Every man listening on the ground expected the usual silence that followed when a Mustang's wings froze. It never came. Instead, Mitchell's calm Oklahoma drawl. I've got tone on him. Rolling inverted. Fox 2. No guns, guns, guns. The pause. Then, almost laughing, scratch 1 bandit. My controls are free all the way to the stop. What the hell did you guys do to my airplane? Back at Debden, the tower loudspeaker carried the transmission across the field. Ground crews looked at each other. Rodriguez allowed himself the smallest nod. Mitchell pressed the attack. Barrel rolling through the German formation at 450 miles per hour indicated. wings never stiffening once. He claimed one FW-190 destroyed and one damaged, then escorted his shaken flight home without loss. The moment 639's wheels touched English soil at 14:27, pilots sprinted across the dispersal. Mitchell vaulted from the cockpit still wearing his parachute. "Who touched my airplane?" he demanded, half angry, half euphoric. Rodriguez stepped forward. "I did, sir." Mitchell stared for a second, then grabbed the sergeant's hand and shook it so hard the pliers fell out of Rodriguez's pocket. "Whatever you did, do it to every damn Mustang on this field." Within an hour, the access panels on every 354th Fighter Group P-51B were open. Crew chiefs passed coils of safety wire hand to hand like contraband. By nightfall, 9 aircraft had the modification. By the next morning, 23 pilots who had been scheduled to fly the unmodified ships refused to take off until the wire was installed. No written orders were ever issued. No paperwork crossed a desk. The 12th Air Force's technical inspectors would later call it unauthorized field improvisation. The pilots called it survival. In the next 14 days, the 354th flew 312 sorties with the wired airplanes. They lost 0 pilots to aileron lockup. They shot down 19 German fighters. The 12-inch piece of safety wire had just declared war on the entire Luftwaffe. March 1944 became the month the U.S. 8th Air Force learned how fast good news travels when lives are on the line. By the 8th of March, every P-51B in the 354th Fighter Group carried the safety wire loop. Crew chiefs worked in pairs after midnight, flashlights taped red, speaking in whispers. A coil of 0.03 to stainless wire disappeared from stores and was never logged out again. When the supply sergeant asked questions, he was handed a cup of coffee and told to look the other way. The modification crossed squadron boundaries the way rumors do in a small English village. A 356th Fighter Squadron pilot landed at Debden with battle damage, saw the open wing root panels, and asked what the ground crews were doing. 10 minutes later, he took off again with the wire installed. That night, he phoned his own base at Martlesham Heath. "Tell the boys to bring pliers." Within 10 days, the 4th Fighter Group at Debden, the 355th at Steeple Morden, the 357th at Leiston, and the 364th at Honington all flew wired Mustangs. No memos, no movement orders, just telephone calls between crew chiefs who had trained together stateside and trusted each other more than they trusted headquarters. Pilots began to refuse missions in unmodified ships. On the 18th of March, Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, then a flight leader in the 363rd Fighter Squadron, taxied back to the line rather than take off in a fresh replacement Mustang that still had factory cable tension. He told his squadron commander, "Sir, I'm not dying for North Americans' ego." The airplane was wired in 20 minutes, and Yeager flew it that afternoon. The numbers told the story faster than any report ever could. February 1940 for pre-wire. 354th Fighter Group exchange ratio 1 to 1.2 for every German aircraft. Destroyed, the group lost 1 point to Mustangs. Most to aileron lock or subsequent combat damage after controls froze. First half of March. Partial adoption. Ratio flipped to 3.8 to 1 victories. Second half of March, 100% wired aircraft, 11 to 1. By June 1944, after the entire 8th and 9th Air Forces had quietly adopted the fix, the Mustang groups were averaging 19 German aircraft destroyed for every P-51 lost in air combat. The Luftwaffe day fighter arm never recovered. Higher headquarters could not ignore the statistics forever. On the 4th of April 1944, a coded telex from 8 Fighter Command reached every Mustang group. Cease unauthorized control system modifications. Pending engineering investigation. The message was filed in waste baskets across eastern England. Squadron commanders initialed received and did nothing. North American Aviation's liaison officers arrived at Debden on the 11th of April demanding to know who had altered factory settings. They left red-faced when shown the kill board and informed that the unauthorized mod had just saved 38 pilots in 1 week. In May 1944, North American test pilot Bob Chilton flew a company P-51B fitted with Rodriguez's exact cable tension and safety wire loop. His report, still classified until 1978, concluded, full aileron control maintained to 0.8 to Mach. No adverse handling qualities noted. The company's solution appeared on the P-51D production line in June as the aileron boost tab. an internal spring bungee system, an elegant, machined version of one enlisted man's 12 inches of lock wire. The official technical order, T0016OJE12, dated the 1st of July 1944, described the new system as an engineering refinement developed in cooperation with 8th Air Force. Technical Sergeant James Rodriguez's name appeared nowhere. By the end of summer 1944, more than 2,800 P-51s in Europe carried what pilots still called the Debden mod. Ground crews kept spare coils of safety wire in their toolboxes long after the factory fix arrived, just in case some new replacement airplane showed up with cables cranked down California tight. The Luftwaffe's leading aces began refusing to engage. Mustangs at high altitude. Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring fighter pilot in history, later wrote that after March 1944 the P-51 suddenly became a different airplane, one we could no longer predict. An idea born in a foggy hangar with a pair of pliers had, in 12 weeks, stripped the German daylight fighter force of its last tactical advantage, and almost no one outside the fighter bases ever knew how it happened. By VE Day the safety wire fix was universal, yet James Rodriguez remained a technical sergeant with no campaign ribbon. Beyond the standard European Theater Medal, no one pinned a Distinguished Service Cross on his chest. No North American aviation press release ever mentioned the enlisted man whose idea had saved their airplane. The official story crystallized fast. The P-51D's new aileron boost system was credited to a joint 8th Air Force North American Aviation Engineering team, led by a civilian test pilot and 2 lieutenant colonels. Technical Order 016OJE12 listed 3 officers as originators. Rodriguez's name did not appear, even in the footnotes. Some of the silence was bureaucratic habit. Enlisted personnel rarely received credit for field modifications. The Army Air Forces preferred to believe solutions came from factories and headquarters. Some of it was deliberate. In 1946, when the newly independent U.S. Air Force began writing its official histories, the aileron lock crisis was quietly rewritten as a minor compressibility issue solved by science, not by one Hispanic sergeant with a pair of pliers. The few internal reports that mentioned Rodriguez were classified confidential and buried in the Air Technical Intelligence archives at Wright Field. They stayed there for 53 years. Only one photograph of him survives from the war, a grainy black and white taken in June 1944. Outside Debden's Hangar 3, Rodriguez stands in coveralls, hands in pockets, surrounded by grinning pilots of the 353rd Fighter Squadron. On the back, someone penciled Robby and the boys who owe him a beer. The picture never made the official group history. After demobilization in October 1945, he returned to San Antonio, married his pre-war sweetheart, and opened a small garage on South Flores Street. He fixed Chevrolets and Fords for 35 years, raised 3 children, and never once told customers he had helped win the air war over Europe. When old squadron mates tracked him down in the 1970s, he shrugged and said, "It was just my job." He refused invitations to reunions. When the 354th Fighter Group historian finally interviewed him in 1992, Rodriguez insisted the story stay out of the newsletter. Let the pilots have their glory. They're the ones who flew. He died on the 14th of February 1998 at the Audie Murphy VA Hospital in San Antonio, aged 83, still holding the rank he had worn in 1944. In 2001, after the relevant files were declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, aviation historians pieced together the statistical impact between March 1944 and May 1945. The sudden disappearance of high-speed aileron lockup reduced 8th Air Force fighter losses by an estimated 180 to 215 pilots. Those men came home, married, raised families, lived entire lives, because one man twisted a piece of wire one night in an English hangar. Most of them never learned his name. Today, if you walk the flight line at the National Museum of the United States Air Force and stand beneath the restored P-51D Crepes Mighty, you can see the polished aileron boost tab gleaming on the wing. The museum label credits North American Aviation and the Army Air Forces Materiel Command. It does not mention Technical Sergeant James Robby Rodriguez. Some victories are too quiet for the history books. By the end of the war, the P-51 Mustang had flown to 113,873 combat sorties, destroyed 4,950 enemy aircraft in the air, and escorted 15,000 heavy bombers to targets most generals once considered untouchable. It became the symbol of American air dominance, the plane that broke the Luftwaffe's back and made daylight precision bombing possible. None of that would have happened the same way without 12 inches of safety wire twisted in a dark hangar in March 1944. Because one enlisted mechanic refused to accept that pilots had to die for factory settings, the Mustang went from a beautiful long-range escort that bled pilots to the most feared fighter in the European sky. The 19-to-1 kill ratio of summer 1944 was not the result of better engines or more guns. It was the direct consequence of a control column that finally answered when a pilot needed it most. James Rodriguez never asked for statues or headlines. He asked only that the airplane stop killing their crews. In doing so, he proved something the history books still struggle to admit. Sometimes the decisive weapon in a global war is not a new radar or a heavier bomb, but a single human being willing to ignore the word impossible. The next time you see a restored Mustang thunder down a runway, listen for the whistle of air. Over those wings, somewhere in that sound is the echo of a coil of wire, a pair of pliers, and one quiet man who changed everything. And ask yourself this: how many garages, workshops, and basements right now hold the next piece of wire that could change the world if only someone is brave enough to twist it? Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and subscribe for more forgotten histories that actually decided the fate of nations. The next one might be about you.